Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
It's a funny old world, as Margaret Thatcher once said. 100 years, almost exactly, from the first February Revolution in Russia, and more than a quarter of a century since the end of history, foretold by the collapse of the Soviet Union, the word Russia is everywhere.
If you believe the experts, Russia is currently in command of almost every political development in the Western world, from the election of President Trump through Brexit to the forthcoming election for the presidency of France.
Left-wing parties are talking right and right-wing parties are talking left. President Trump has just scrapped the free trade TPP and put the effective abolition of NAFTA on the table. And the American labor unions emerged this week from a rare visit to the White House, saying they had been treated with unbelievable respect and that Trump was the president they'd been waiting for. Our first guest is a very important man indeed. He is Chief of Staff at Britain's biggest trade union, Unite, right-hand man of Len McCluskey. He's a member of the TUC General Council, and he's a veteran leader of Britain's anti-war movement, the Stop the War Coalition. He's Andrew Murray. Andrew, let me start with this question of how boundaries appear to be shifting. A man known to both of us, a distinguished journalist, an erstwhile Trotskyite, Paul Mason, was up in arms the other day about the danger to NATO posed by the election of President Trump. Indeed, on Question Time a few days before that, he'd called for President Obama and the CIA to physically stop Donald Trump from taking the oath of office on the grounds that he was a security risk because of his supposed relations with Russia. So if an erstwhile Trotskyite is talking in these terms, whilst Trump is scrapping free trade arrangements, insisting on US steel in the building of infrastructure and so on, the old terms of left and right are definitely shifting.
I mean, I don't agree with Paul in those examples that you've indicated. I think protecting the integrity of NATO is very low down on the priority of most voters, of Labour voters in this country, and of most socialists. And the idea of overturning the outcome of a democratic election is really no way forward. But I think the deeper problem is that the left, across much of the developed world, shall we say, is paying the price for its prolonged and disastrous embrace of economic liberalism. New Labour in Britain, a particularly lurid example. The Clintons in the USA, hardly less so. Hollande in France, most recently. And this has struck a cleavage through the coalition that has supported left-wing politics, socialist politics, social democratic politics, in one country after another. President Trump adeptly exploited that to win his sufficient majority in the key states in the presidential election last November, and it's a lesson that we desperately need to learn.
Trade unions would not often have been in Downing Street of late, least of all under a Labour Prime Minister. I doubt if they've been in the White House in the last 8 years. Trump met them in the first 3 days of his presidency, and they were enormously impressed by what he had to say. If you take out the sexism, the misogyny and the racism, and I know that these are very big things, Trump's program was effectively a left-wing program. It was defending jobs, workers, industry, and it was the idea that the interests of the American working class would be back at the top of the agenda. Proved very effective. It
proved very effective in the key industrial states. I mean, I'm sure we'd agree you can't just take out the misogyny and the racism and the potential authoritarianism and regard that as of no account. But nevertheless, his message of economic nationalism, putting America first, in industrial questions, and scrapping the trade deals, which were often sponsored by parties or leaders of the left, but have been disastrous for industrial communities in Britain as in America, is enormously popular. We will have to see whether 6 months down the line or a couple of years down the line, Trump, who of course has formed a cabinet of billionaires and rather Strangelove type military characters, whether they'll actually deliver on that. But the trade unions in the USA, I can't speak for them, but I do know that many workers are desperate for relief from economic liberalism, and Trump is indicating in that direction. And
well, I actually thought they were dead. I never heard of these American trade unions at all.
She was amazed that they existed.
Well, like unions in many other parts of the world, but more so, I think, they have declined in numbers, certainly, and they have become more reliant on public sector trade unions, where unionisation is easier. But my own union, Unite, we have a strong relationship with what's now called the USW. It was the Steel Workers Union, based in Pittsburgh, where you can see the devastation of the last 30 years, much of it exacerbated by the policies of Bill Clinton, and which Hillary Clinton would probably have carried forward.
But the Obama and Clinton were very sound on what you might call identity issues or liberal issues, not quite as sound as they now pretend. I mean, on deportations, for example, Barack Obama deported more people from the United States than all previous American presidents put together, but they were, let's say, they spoke nicely and they were mindful of people's differences and so on. But they championed an economic system which beggared and destroyed not just white workers, but all workers in the United States.
Well, they did. Some of that was masked at the time by general economic growth, which took some of the edge off for a time, and then after 20 or 30 years the economy goes into the enormous slump we've seen from 2008. People turn around and see utter devastation, not just economic devastation, social devastation, families, communities, very high levels of drug addiction, other social pathologies. I think, of course, we need to recast the whole polarisation of identity politics and class politics insofar as the working class is half female, it's multi-ethnic, it has many people who are gay or lesbian, a very diverse class, and that diversity needs to be recognised if its unity is to be enhanced. But that cannot be, to come back to the central point, on the basis of free market economics. And one can't say that advancing legislation, very good, important, progressive legislation on particular social questions, trumps, as it were, an economic policy. Bill Clinton was right on one thing: it is the economy, stupid.
Absolutely.
And that is where his stupid economics have failed.
In France, we have a very similar thing occurring. Parties that are of the right are talking left, and the parties of the left, you mentioned Hollande, who's limped off the field with 4% in the public opinion polls, they're talking right. They're defending neoliberalism, defending the EU's neoliberal economic basis, defending NATO, hostile to Russia, and so on. So this is not just an American thing, it's everywhere, isn't it?
It is everywhere. I mean, it's extraordinary. The Labour Party in this country at the moment is not polling terribly well, but the extraordinary fact is it is polling better than the Social Democratic Party in any other country in Europe, with the possible exception of Norway. France, you've mentioned, the SPD in Germany, the once mighty SPD, 20%. The Dutch Labour Party, a regular getter of 40% of the vote 30 or 40 years ago, is now, I think, in some polls, in 8th place in the forthcoming general election in the Netherlands. This is something that social...
Point my Dutch wife is forever pointing out to me.
The Socialist Party, to the left of them, that's actually growing.
I know
instead.
there are in some of those countries left parties that sort of top up the aggregate left vote, but of course few of those have actually been tested by exercising office, and where they have, as in Greece, the results have not been terribly good. So it does tend to show that the social democratic movement does not have answers to the problems of the time or has not had in the last 30 years. They've hitched themselves to a sort of modified neoliberalism with flowers and fragrance, but neoliberalism yet. And since 2008, it is evident to everyone that doesn't work.
Let's finish by talking about Russia. Russia's a normal capitalist country, and yet Western powers seem intent on treating it as if it were an ideological opponent, an existential threat. It's blamed for everything, from so-called fake news to putting Trump in the White House as a kind of Manchurian candidate. A Labour MP, Ben Bradshaw, said in Parliament recently that Russia was almost certainly involved in the Brexit vote here. They're accused of hand-picking the next president of France. What is it about Russia, and is it a real danger to Trump if he does make this rapprochement with Russia? Isn't he at physical risk in doing so?
I think he'd be at political risk, probably. I mean, by which I mean impeachment, or I mean, there's enough material to hand to get that off the ground if they wish to. But I do think it's extraordinary. If you look since his election, his policies on a range of other things, the elite have more or less swallowed or prepared to put up with, even tearing up trade agreements, even very provocative moves towards China or potential moves, rhetoric at any event. They've sort of gone along with it. The pushback on his idea of forming a better relationship with Russia has been extraordinary and has stretched across the political spectrum, from some of his right-wing backers who are clearly unhappy with it and are pushing back, to people on the liberal left. It is a form of madness because, as you say, Russia is now a capitalist country. It does not pose the ideological challenge, the systemic challenge that the existence of the Soviet Union did. You could say Russia is authoritarian, but no more so, less so indeed than China, and much less so than Saudi Arabia, for example. Its intervention in the Middle East is minuscule compared with the serial and disastrous interventions of the Western powers. It is very hard to find a rational basis for it, other than people, the elite, need an enemy. Maybe China is too big and risky a one to address. Also that Russia is filling a vacuum to some extent in the Middle East, pushing back against some American interests there. But these are only half reasons. I don't offer them as the full story. Maybe it's just familiarity. Russia was the enemy for so long in its Soviet days that people can't think of anything else. But it is irrational and very, very dangerous. And we've seen recently more pro-Russian politicians been elected in several countries. The front-runners in the French presidential election are all more pro-Russian, and it seems to be driving some people mad. The idea of having a better relationship, I mean, that is all that Trump has said, really. Listening to the possibility that Russia has a point of view that needs to be taken seriously rather than just be treated with disdain, as it was in the 1990s, treated as a little consequence. That seems to be causing hysteria, and it has to be challenged, because this sort of psychosis is the anteroom to war.
Andrew Murray, thanks for joining us again on the Sputnik.
Coming up next, a strange tale from across the Mersey. Don't miss it.
Welcome back to Sputnik. Al Jazeera's recent documentary series shed a spotlight on the alleged role of the Israeli embassy in the corridors of power in Britain. A senior Israeli official was apparently captured, unwisely boasting of how they were trying to bring down Britain's deputy foreign minister, and a veritable hit list of British MPs was suggested to him by his interlocutors.
It was claimed by one of those interlocutors that almost all Britain's Conservative MPs are members of the Friends of Israel, and that their counterpart in the Labour Party is large, powerful and proactive. Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, wrote to the Prime Minister demanding an inquiry, but none has yet been forthcoming.
One of the front lines of the inner-party conflict in Labour is Merseyside, though there are many fissures present there. Local Labour organisations are either suspended or in special measures. Normal reselection procedures will likely be suspended, thus protecting several Labour MPs thought to be under threat of replacement. One of those is Liverpool's Riverside constituency, and our next guest is a veteran and well-known activist there. She's Audrey White, and she joins us now. Glenda Jackson famously played you in a movie in the 1980s. That was a tumultuous period in Labour history too. Is this not just a rerun, shorn of all these allegations of homophobia and anti-Semitism and Trotskyism and left-wing infiltration and so on? This is really just a power struggle, isn't it?
Well, it is a power struggle, you're right. It's about the right versus the left. And it's about the use of slurs and allegations and smoking mirrors instead of addressing the arguments. And it's fabulous to live in Liverpool now with the resurgence, greater than it ever was, never mind the 80s. Look ahead. What's going on now is massive. The young people, people from all different walks of life who are flooding to the Labour Party, and yet we're not allowed to function.
Well, the proximate reason seems to have been an anonymous dossier that was produced, we know not from where, and we can't allege from where, but there's no doubt the dossier was produced and was used as part of the argument to get you and other constituencies in Merseyside suspended or placed in special measures. What do you know about this dossier?
Well, can I just go back a bit? Because it started from a tweet from a councillor Small in Liverpool, saying he's never heard, this was as far back as April, saying he's never heard of anti-Semitism comments that he's heard at a recent constituency meeting. And from then on, we were slandered around our city. It was slandered, really, because this is a city centre constituency. So we're all denigrated and slurred against by being accused of tolerating anti-Semitism. So that went on and it built up in the press that it was acceptable to say that Riverside constituency Labour Party had people making anti-Semitic comments and nobody doing anything about it. So that's where it started. And then it went on with no action being taken at all. Me writing to the North West Labour Party, writing to the executive, well, this is all around the place, what's happening? And nothing happened. Ignored every correspondence. Then, all of a sudden, days before the Labour Party conference, that document that you're talking about was produced very, very conveniently to sabotage the Jeremy Corbyn's conference, and it was touted around all of the television stations, the newspapers and so on, anonymously. Anonymous document. How can you do that, George? It's terrible. The stuff in that document is full of lies and libel.
I knew Eddie Loyden. He was a friend of mine in Parliament for many years, and I've known you for many years. And I know that Eddie Loyden is not your father.
Yes.
And yet that's in the document, that Eddie Loyden is your father, which is a tremendous slur on your mother and a great insult to your father, of course.
Well, I think what it does show is the lack of interest in the truth. Because to put that in this document, it's complete disregard for accuracy. So what I would like to say is that that reflects everything else, the garbage that's in it. Absolutely.
But how did they manage to put that in then? Where did that come from?
I was meant to have said it on the radio, and I asked for evidence of this. So what's quite shocking is the lengths they were going to protect an anonymous document that contained libel. It was sent to me, not a link, but an audio recording. And I've had that audio recording forensically examined because I didn't believe that I'd said Eddie Loyden was my father. And I've got a report from a top expert witness who analyses these things, and he said there's 3 indications around the place where I'm supposed to have said Eddie Loyden was my father has been changed.
Doctored.
Doctored, yeah. So what I actually said was Eddie Loyden was my father's agent.
Right.
He was a lovely man, Eddie Lloyden.
I'm not sure you are libelled by being called Eddie Lloyden's daughter, because he was a very fine man. But your mother's definitely libelled in that, and I know a thing or two about libel. Let's go on to the bigger issues. Next door in Wallasey, they're completely suspended indefinitely.
Yes.
On the supposed allegation that someone, an official, presumably of the constituency, tolerated homophobic abuse of their MP, Jeremy Corbyn's one-time challenger, Angela Eagle, even though the person who chaired the meeting was herself the mother of a daughter in a same-sex marriage. You couldn't make that up. And that a brick had been thrown through Angela Eagle MP's window. It turned out it wasn't her window and it wasn't a brick. So how is it possible that an entire constituency Labour Party could remain now, many, many months, completely suspended on such bogus pretext?
It mirrors what's happening in Liverpool, Liverpool Riverside. You've got nobody charged with anti-Semitism, but the whole world thinks there's anti-Semitism there. The same thing with the homophobic complaints. Nobody's actually been charged with being homophobic. So it's smoke and mirrors, George. It's just unbelievable. The machinery of the Labour Party is being used to help these people hold on to power. They are terrified of our movement. It wasn't Jeremy Corbyn, it was the movement that they're really afraid of. They've tried to cut the head off the movement by trying to attack Jeremy Corbyn. Then when they failed that, they've come back to the membership. We want to be out there now. We want to campaign for the Women's Hospital that the Labour Party are very, very quiet over. They should be out there campaigning with us. We're campaigning for the dockers, for basic services that the dockers should have. They should be with us over these things. They've had it so easy for so long. They're terrified that this movement will be putting demands on them to protect ordinary people.
If this is all about Jeremy Corbyn as the head of this movement that you talk of, what does Jeremy Corbyn have to say about this? Thousands, in fact, scores of thousands of his supporters were either expelled or suspended or otherwise denied a vote. His supporting constituencies, like Wallasey, like Riverside, are either suspended or in special measures. If he's the leader of the Labour Party, why isn't he doing something about it? And if he can't do something about it, in what sense is he the leader of the Labour Party?
I think he's doing a brilliant job as being leader of the Labour Party. I think that you have to look at the fact that they've probably won for the first time in history and probably throughout the world where you actually have a leadership that is way ahead of the organisation of a political party. We are the biggest political party in the whole of Europe. And it's all because at the top we have this one man who is really, really reflecting the mood of the country and the mood of ordinary people. But who owns the machinery of the Labour Party? Not Jeremy Corbyn. He's not a dictator. He can't say this happens and that happens. We are a democratic party. And to do that, we've got a long, long way to go to change the machinery, to make sure that we have MPs that represent us, to make sure that the chair of the constituency doesn't manipulate everything so that we can't have discussions, which is what's happened in our constituency.
Has he come by? Has he been recently?
Oh, he come a few times to Liverpool, and the demonstrations we've had were absolutely
he's very
wonderful.
popular in Liverpool, but if his constituency Labour parties are in suspended animation, there's a clear problem there. Audrey White, thanks for joining us on the Sputnik. And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
So Russia seems to commend everything from Moscow now, from Trump to Brexit and now allegedly also splitting NATO. To which Euroman activist says, I like everything what Mr. Putin does. We don't need expensive and obsolete NATO.
It's very weird that these right-wing politicians think that the masses across Europe are fixated on keeping NATO and its unity at vast expense and for no purpose.
Yeah.
It is a remarkable misconception.
What's also remarkable is Donald Trump's meeting with the American trade unions, which is just truly unbelievable. So we posted a picture of him with meeting them around the table. And Amy Wyatt says, why are they all clapping this Nazi?
Well, he's not a Nazi. I mean, anybody that thinks Donald Trump is a Nazi has never actually seen a Nazi. He's completely mercurial, impulsive, petulant, childish, many other things. But he's not a Nazi. And the really important thing about that picture is that within 3 days of taking power, he brought the American trade unions into the White House. I'm willing to bet they never set foot in the White House in the whole 8 years of Barack Obama.
That's right. And that's all the time we have for the tweets today.
Which, alas, means that's the end of the show.
But you can stay in touch with us on Twitter and Instagram, RT_Sputnik, or Facebook, Sputnik on Russia Today. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.